Okay, welcome back to this third video now. We're going to go into the big question, which is the 16 marker for the Elizabeth paper. So paper 2, Edexcel. Everything I say in this video will apply for all the other 16 markers apart from the one on Weimar, Germany, which is different. I'll put a tutorial up for that at another date. Okay, so this is what we need in terms of our ingredients. So we need an introduction which states our argument and how far we agree with the statement. It's really important that early doors you get your judgment in, because if your answer doesn't have a judgment in, I think you can't get more than something like 4 out of 16. So you really got to make sure that judgment's in. So just really clearly state how far you agree with the statement. Never say I agree or I disagree. You have to say how far. So you must say I strongly agree or I partly agree or I strongly disagree with the statement. You then write 3 PR paragraphs. So that stands for point, evidence, explain, analysis, link. And so you do point, evidence, explain is just like what you would do in the 12 mark tutorial. If you haven't seen that, watch my video on the 12 marker. But the analysis and the link are really important. So the analysis and link essentially do this. So at the end of your paragraph, you should be writing a couple of sentences which link back to your overall argument, okay? And so essentially, and the way I like to use, kind of encourage students to remember this is it acts like a mini conclusion. Okay. So it's basically a little conclusion, mini conclusion, which revisits your overall argument that you've introduced in the introduction. And again, I'll show you what this looks like so you know what to do. And then at the end of your essay, you should be writing a conclusion, again stating your argument and saying how far you agree with the statement. Okay, so this is the question that we're going to be having a look at today. I have not even really looked at the question. I just screenshotted a random one. So let me just get a pen up. Okay, so there was little change in education in early Elizabethan England. I know a lot of you are not a fan of topic 3, so I did pick a topic 3 one. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the statement. So we've got little change and education. So our focus, the focus of the question is the fact that that we're focused on the education system. And then in our explanation, what we need to be revisiting is thinking about little change. We need to explain whether there was change or not. Okay, and that's what we need to be focused on. All right, so we constantly need to be thinking about, well, this was an example of a lot of change because, or this was an example of no change / continuity because. And obviously, the question says how far you agree. So we need to make sure we're giving our judgment throughout and every single paragraph. The judgment's got to be present. Now, like I said, you don't have to use the stimulus points. And in fact, if you don't go beyond the stimulus points, you are limited in terms of your marks. So we could mention education for girls or petty schools. I'm going to mention education for girls. I probably won't really mention petty schools. Now, just before we even start looking at the points, for those of you who are taught by me, you'll know that I will always say your first paragraph should be an agree paragraph. Your second paragraph should always disagree, just because if you run out of time, you want to make sure you're showing both sides of the argument. And then the last one is really up to you. So it's agree / disagree. I usually disagree because I think it makes for a more interesting essay if you disagree with a statement, but it's really up to you at this point, okay? So let's have a think then. So the first thing, the examples of little change, I'm probably going to put here education for women is probably going to be my example there. All right. Because that's quite a big, that's a classic example of no change. So we've got the fact that literacy rates remain at 10%, the fact that women mainly go to dame schools. There is an increase in them, but it's not significant. Okay. So if you want to know where I'm getting this from, I'm literally taking it from these slides. So here we go at the bottom. Impact of Elizabethan education, 10% of women were illiterate. Okay. I know I've put here that dame schools did see an increase, but ultimately they'd been around beforehand. So I'm going to actually use that as an example of continuity, even though it says their change, because I will recognize that there were some more dame schools introduced, but it wasn't significant. Okay. For my disagree then, I'm going to mention grammar schools because that is the biggest example of change in Elizabethan England. So we've got 42 grammar schools and then 30 more in the 1570s. I will then briefly explain what the grammar schools were all about. So the fact that there were fees, but ultimately lower class boys could get a scholarship. And then also I'll talk about the fact that they were designed to focus on the key aspects of education. So like literacy, numeracy, functional education. Okay, and then we've got either agree or disagree. So I will, let me think. I will probably, for this question, I'm probably going to disagree. Yeah, let's do, I'll probably disagree and I will do university education is probably the go-to. So I'll do disagree and then highlight that one. So that's what we're doing. Okay, right, let me get rid of all these annotations on the screen because they are bugging me. So we got rid of those. Okay, cool. Right, so that's basically how I'm going to structure my answer. Now, because I've got two disagree, that means I'm either going to be partly or strongly disagreeing with the statement. I would not really partly disagree with this one because women don't actually see an improvement. So I'm going to say I partly disagree. Why is this going so? Oh, there we go. So I partly disagree. And my rationale is that education for women did not improve. But for men, there were general improvements. Some men improved more than others, but even for the poorest men in society, the fact that some of them could get those scholarships, the fact that overall literacy rates did increase, meant that they did see at least some improvements, or at least that's what I'm going to be arguing, just because it's probably the easiest argument. And then in my conclusion, I will basically restate kind of my overall argument. Okay, so now let me just pull up a slide. I'll just copy and paste the question across. Okay, so this is what my introduction should look like. So I'm going to start by saying, in this essay, this essay will strongly disagree with the statement and will argue that there was, in fact, why I was saying strongly, partly disagree. And I will argue that there was change in education in Elizabethan England, but only for men. Women saw little improvement. Now, you don't have to do this next part. I'm just going to do it just because this is the kind of good habits you want to build with writing introductions going forward, especially if you do A-level history. But again, if you're running out of time in an exam, you don't need to. This is enough. Okay, that's enough as an intro. Okay, the bonus part we might say is what factors we're going to do. So this essay will first consider education for women as an example of continuity, and grammar schools and universities as examples of change. Okay, now a lot of you are probably thinking, well, the men at the bottom of society didn't see much of an improvement. That is correct. But because this is a GCSE answer, I'm not going to focus too much on that. Unfortunately, you just don't have the timing. I will recognize at some point in the answer, but the majority of my answer is just going to be arguing that women don't see improvement, men see an improvement. Bit of a simple argument, but it's an argument that will get you're still able to get the top marks. And it's an easy argument for anything to do with education and changes to education. Okay, so key thing here I've got is my judgment in green. And then we've got those factors listed. And the key thing here as well is I've given my rationale. So I've given my argument. All right. So I'm just making note of that. So green is judgment and red is reason for judgment. Okay. Those two things need to be in an introduction. Okay. That's a must. Right. So now let me we'll write up some of the paragraphs. I don't know how many I'm going to write. So I'll start off by saying, although I disagree with the statement, so keep your argument throughout. Although I partly disagree with the statement, one reason why someone may agree is because of education for women. Throughout this period, female literacy rates remained at just 10%. Furthermore, there's little education. So furthermore, although there was an increase in dame schools, this was very minimal, and the dame school continued to be the only option for most girls the only educational option for most girls up until I think it's 6. I might be wrong on that. Up until the age of 6. This is why revision is very important. Okay, let me see. Furthermore, in fact, yeah, so up until the age of 6, and even then, dame schools were what's the word? Were focused on functional education, preparing women for the home, which is arguably different from what we would consider from academic. Yeah. A functional education, which is it's going quite sophisticated. I will put this in, but you wouldn't need this sentence. So it's arguably different from academic education. In fact, you know what? I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to leave it at that, just because it's getting too complicated. Okay, so we've got our key piece of evidence. So we've got the female literacy rates at 10%, and then we've got the fact that dame schools continue to be the only educational option for most girls. We might also say dame schools were also limited in the education they provided, only preparing girls for a life in the home. Okay, so you can see there, it took me a while to get the evidence written down. That's normal, okay? So don't panic. Just think about in the exam, like, what's the best way to phrase stuff, all right? So we've got 2 to 3 pieces of evidence there. That's pretty bang on. That's what you want. So we're going to say this is in a clear example of change, a clear example of continuity, because the lack of improvement in literacy rates suggests that females did not, or proves that females did not experience academic improvements. Now, education is not just about academics, so we need to deal with that other part. So although education is not just academic, the fact that dame schools remain the only option is further proof or reinforces the idea that women, or it's further proof there was little change or innovation for female education during this period. Okay, so now I've done my evidence and I've done my explanation. I now need to do my analysis. So this is the bit that's really important. I'll write this bit in red so it's clear to you. All right, and the reason I'm writing in red is because this is linking back to my judgment and the reason for my judgment. However, it would be wrong to generalize and say that just because women did not experience improvements, there was little change in education during the period. Although women did not see improvements, there were considerable changes for men, which will now be explored. Okay, do you see how that's linking back to my argument in the intro? It's detailed. I'm saying on the one hand they've got a point, but on the other hand we need to consider men and why that's important proof. Okay, right, now what I'll do is I'll write the second paragraph. So I'm going to start by saying one reason why I partly disagree with the statement is due to the introduction of grammar schools. In the grammar schools, so I'm going to say what a grammar school was. So grammar schools, so basically I'm just linking back here to my overall judgment. So grammar schools were fee-paying schools, were schools requiring fees for please, and provided an academically rigorous education for boys, specializing in numeracy, literacy, and other skills necessary for a life of commerce and trade. So it's about preparing them for a life of business, essentially. I'm then going to say, although they existed beforehand, and considering a counter argument, they the Elizabeth, the period, so 42, so specific evidence, schools introduced in the 1560s, and 30 new grammar schools introduced in the 1570s. Really specific evidence. Very few students around the country can be able to do that level of specificity. Okay, we want to be getting that in. 30 new grammar schools introduced in the 1570s. This was an important improvement, or this was a significant improvement. Okay, so let's just pause for a second. Let's just go back and just highlight the key parts. So what I'm highlighting there is my point sentence. So I'm going to highlight them in red because, again, I'm linking back to my overall argument, even though I'm considering this was my evidence. So evidence we do in blue, and then that in green. By the way, when I say analysis and link, they just combine. Right, so in this one, we've got red. Okay, and we've got our evidence now. Oh, hang on, sorry. Let me just put that into green. Okay. So then I'm going to say this was a significant improvement as there were now opportunities for boys. There were now more educational opportunities for boys than existed beforehand. Furthermore, grammar schools offered scholarships. So I'm putting a bit of evidence in here. Oh, snap. Which suggests that furthermore, grammar schools also suggest that boys from poorer backgrounds also benefited from this new form of education, albeit to a lesser degree. Okay. Now I'm moving to my analysis. So I'm going to say something like, therefore, the introduction of new grammar schools is proof that, in fact, have I done my explanation as well? No, what this beforehand. And these, I'm just going to develop the explanation slightly. And these opportunities opened up a range of new avenues for boys, especially in the commercial sector. So most grammar schools are about training boys for professional jobs at this stage, like the commercial sector, growing trade, and so on. Therefore, the introduction of new grammar schools is proof that there was significant change for men in Elizabethan England. Right, here's my killer point. So I'm going to look at my flashcard. Now look at this. So if you look at the very bottom, 1530, 20% of men were literate. By the end of the period, it's 30% of men. So I'm going to say female literacy may have remained constant, but male literacy went from 20% to 30% over the course of this period, proving the importance of grammar schools. Therefore, I partly disagree with them. Okay. Right. Just for the sake of time, because I know you will all want to be leaving this video, I would then do a third paragraph on university education. In terms of my evidence for university education, I'd be talking about this. So I would be, just pull that up. So I would be talking about the introduction of new colleges. So Emmanuel College, Jesus College. I'd be talking about Subaltern Mildmay for extra points in terms of my evidence. I'd then be talking about how university education provide the highest level of education. So the fact that there's new colleges means there's going to be more spaces available and more very highly skilled people who can contribute to society. Although there aren't, most of those men are going to be from an upper class background, there's still improvements for men. And there's very significant improvements. If you can go to get a university education, it's going to be very, very important. So here, my third paragraph would be on, so paragraph 3 would be on university education. Okay, and that would be, again, disagreeing with the statement. Okay, right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to write the conclusion so you can see what a conclusion looks like. And then, again, don't complicate the conclusion. You're only on GCSE, so don't overcomplicate it. So I'm going to say, in conclusion, I partly disagree with the statement. And then just going to really quickly recap all my paragraphs. So the lack of new opportunities for lack of new educational opportunities meant female literacy remained consistently poor, but the introduction of more grammar schools and more university colleges expanded the number of opportunities available to men, especially men of a wealthy background. The fact that these new opportunities increased male literacy meant there was quite a lot of change. Men, quite a lot of educational change for men in the period. Something like that. Okay, so all I'm doing is I'm restating again in green my judgment, and then in red I'm giving my reason for the judgment, which is all of that basically. Recapping what I've already said, and then just really just honing in on my argument. So I hope that was helpful. That's the hardest question in fact, on paper 2, I would say the 16 marker. We recommend that you do that first. So in terms of ordering, do the 16 marker first, then do the 12 marker, then do the Cold War, and then come back and do the Elizabeth IV marker. Okay, hope that was helpful, guys. And stay tuned for the Cold War videos now.